Morning, Claire. You okay?
Yeah, we're well. Listen, we're going to hear from Welsh Government then later this afternoon. What would you be doing today?
Well, I think the first thing to probably point out is we have been seeing since the start of June kind of rises in cases, and this is all linked to the Delta or the Indian variant as people formerly knew it. And if we look back over the last year of the pandemic, the normal thing we'd probably be expecting today is for the Welsh Government to probably come out with more restrictions because of rising cases. But there's a couple of differences between what we saw this time kind of last year and as we went into the autumn. And the two things really on the table today is obviously the vaccine rollout and also the announcements that have been made in England and in Scotland where they're easing restrictions. So let me just explain to the listeners what kind of the vaccine rollout means in terms of that. Is the first thing is the rising cases that we've seen since the start of June is a little different to what we saw back last year and into the autumn. It's predominantly among younger people. And one of the things that means is with cases predominantly among younger people is there's fewer people going into hospital in relation to the rising cases that we saw in the past, and younger people are far less likely to succumb to the virus and have a death as well. So if you track the rising cases and then you look at hospitalizations and then you look at the deaths that normally come 7 and 14 days after, kind of the vaccine has changed the dynamic there. And one of the reasons I think that we're seeing most of the cases in younger people is because they've been later to have the vaccines. And in the past, Claire, what we saw is when we saw rising cases across the country in younger people, it wasn't much longer before it started rising in older people as well. But it's taken a lot longer for that to happen as well. And that's probably a vaccine effect. So I think when you put that all into the mix, the First Minister has got a difficult decision because obviously with rising cases, we will inevitably see rising hospitalisations and some deaths if we completely open up the country. But with England going that way and Scotland heading towards that way as well, it's a difficult balancing decision to make because if we don't unlock the country now, when the school holidays are about to start, you start hitting that point where I think Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty have been saying in England that regardless of when you decide to ease restrictions, you will get an exit wave. And it's probably the best time to do that now during the summer.
Well, I was going to
towards the autumn.
Yeah, Jamie, I was going to say with all of everything that you've put in mind, especially with the vaccine, seeming to do its job. I mean, we're expecting a heat wave over the next few days. We're going to be outside. Could this be a short window? We know it'll be reviewed again the month after. Could this be a short window just to ease restrictions in what would be considered a safer time?
Yeah, I think so. It's probably the best time. I think the consensus among the range of different experts is there's no great time to go the full kind of distance in terms of easing all restrictions. And I know Mark Rakeford has said he's not probably going to go as far as England. And I think Boris Johnson kind of tied his hands up there by announcing several months ago he was going to get rid of everything. And I think he even wrote back he's not planning on completely going as if it was like before COVID on there. So we have got this short window because if we wait a bit longer, what you will then tend to find is that we'll want to ease restrictions at some point. And when we do that, if we get closer towards the autumn and we start looking to ease restrictions then, Claire, you could have the storm of COVID cases will inevitably go up even further when you ease full restrictions. And it's difficult to predict now, but we may have a kind of a flu outbreak in the winter as well, because we didn't really have one last year. And then you get a perfect storm on the NHS. And we know respiratory viruses kind of thrive a lot more in the autumn, winter months as well. So this short window where the schools are kind of going off on holiday and to kind of, as I say, the weather and people will be able to mix outdoors more than they will in the winter time means that it's probably now or never, as in terms of would we have to wait until next year to ease all of the restrictions.
And, Jamie, you know better than most, we don't know the curveball that COVID could throw, and we certainly don't know whether there is a new variant on the horizon.
Yeah, so I think for me, if you look at the latest variant, obviously it came from India, and with the kind of the pandemic being all over the world, it's difficult to control the variants. So if the UK decided to continue with restrictions, that doesn't mean that we're going to see a new variant come in from another country. And even with travel restrictions, because it was predominantly more in the UK and Europe, we're seeing the rise of the Delta variant now all over Europe. So the virus will just naturally find its way and start infecting people. So we get new variants of the flu all of the time as well, and we manage that through modifications to the vaccine. Thankfully, the vaccine seems to work against all of the different variants. And remember, what the vaccine does is a kind of a number of different protections. What if the first thing is it kind of offers protection if you stop in getting the virus. If you do get the virus, it offers protection instead of passing it on to somebody else. But also, if you do get the virus, you're less likely to get seriously ill, looking at all of the data that we see. So I think it's probably now the time to open up the country more. As I say, I don't think Mark Draper will go the full distance of what England have. And if he doesn't, we'll also have an interesting experiment there, Claire, where we'll see what happens in England with maybe fewer restrictions and what happens in Wales. And we'll have two data sets so we can compare the two to see if there was actually any effect.
Jamie, and we'll come back to you, no doubt. Thank you very much.